Have you and your student received your financial aid letter and found out that they're not receiving anything from the university? Or maybe your student hasn't received anything at all from the university in regards to a financial aid package. Maybe there is a reason that they did not get anything, and if so, we are going to dissect what that could possibly be in today's video. But then I'm also going to share 7 ways that you and your student can work towards paying for college without a financial aid package. Now make sure you hit subscribe because every week we release a new strategy to work towards that debt-free degree. So while I'm covering 7 today pretty quickly, we have more in-depth videos coming out on every single one of these and so many more strategies. So again, make sure you hit subscribe. Hey there, my name is Jocelyn Pearson, founder of the Scholarship System, where we redefine paying for college so that families can avoid decades of student loan debt by hopefully securing a debt-free degree. In fact, our families have secured well over $10 million to this date, and we hope to not stop there. We hope to help them secure even more as we go on through the years, providing this helpful advice. Now, one of the things we talk about with paying for college and really working towards that debt-free degree is combining different strategies. Now, one of the big strategies here is maximizing financial aid. So if your student did not receive anything, don't panic yet because there are alternatives, but still we want to make sure that that's accurate. So first I want to cover the reasons that your student may not have received any financial aid. The first reason could be that they are not meeting SAP, or satisfactory academic progress. These are certain academic criteria that students are required to meet in order to receive funding from the institution and or the government. It could be something like their GPA typically that would knock them out. So if they fall below a certain GPA, then they may not be eligible for any of the funding that they previously received if they've already been at the institution and received money, or that they could have received if they've never been there before. Now, going off of that, there's also a minimum credit hours requirement, and therefore maybe they fell below that. So if your student is going to school part-time, that could make them ineligible for a lot of the funding they'd receive if they were full-time. Now, another reason your student didn't receive funding could be simply that their EFC, or their expected family contribution, or based on the new FAFSA updates, it's now called the SAI, Student Aid Index. This is a number, a result that your student will receive after you both submit FAFSA. Maybe it's just too high. So it's saying that your family can afford the full bill and therefore you shouldn't get any funding. Honestly, this is pretty rare where they won't get anything at all, even access to loans. So I would look into that. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But it could be the reason. Now, again, this is based on FAFSA. If you have any questions around FAFSA, we have an entire playlist on FAFSA topics, so we'll link to that in the description below. But FAFSA ultimately pulls income levels as well as assets for both parents and students. So this is all factored into figuring out whether or not your student should indeed receive financial aid. Now, this also, maybe the EFC or SAI is too high because information was entered incorrectly. So we may want to look into that and verify that the information is indeed accurate. If you want to see a general idea of what your student might be eligible for, you can look into the Federal Student Aid Estimator. This is a tool that the government offers to just quickly estimate what they think the FAFSA results would be. So maybe plug the numbers into there just to double check that the results are indeed as high as the EFC came back, or just as a double check to see if the numbers make sense. Now, comment below, is your student's EFC or SAI just incredibly high? Is it something that's totally unrealistic? Honestly, most of you probably think so because it typically is higher than most families can afford, but is yours just insanely high and you're not sure why? If so, comment below and maybe we can help you dissect that a little bit. And last but not least, maybe your student didn't receive a financial aid package simply because their financial aid file is incomplete. Perhaps they were selected for verification, which is a process where the university wants to validate the figures that were submitted in FAFSA, and maybe you didn't even know that that was needed and you have to complete that process. So you may want your student or you to reach out to the financial aid office and see if that's the case, if they need to submit any kind of additional materials in order to finish that application process, and then they'll receive the financial aid letter. So typically they'll get a letter. So if they haven't gotten any letter, then that might be the reason why. So even if the EFC SAI is too high, then they still should receive a letter, but the numbers on the letter might not be too pleasing. But if they're not getting a letter at all, then this last reason might be the culprit. Okay, so let's get into what can we do about this. So first and foremost, if everything was submitted legitimately, if everything is accurate, and this is just the results, you got a letter and your student is going to have to foot the entire bill, they probably need to consider a different institution that's a better financial fit. I know that that's not the most popular suggestion here. I know that a lot of students get their hearts set on a certain school, but the reason I say this is because different schools actually handle the same number from FAFSA differently. So perhaps one school is a 100% need meeting school, and so they would be giving your student more money, where another school is no need meeting, and therefore they're not giving your student anything. So a lot of times, this is something we call following the money when it comes to debt-free degree lab and the scholarship system with our families. But we say, look into the schools that your student wants, but also cast the net wide. We've had students uncover schools that they never thought would ever be a financial fit by doing this. In fact, one student comes to mind, she's graduating debt-free from Duke. Never thought she could go there. She never considered it until we said, let's flip this upside down. Let's look at your list, but let's also look at financial fits here. So going and finding a financial fit school doesn't mean that your student has to go to a less than school or a school that they hate. It could mean just considering a school that wasn't even on their radar, and actually they end up loving it even more. And also keep in mind, there's a little bit of a factor there where affordability factors greatly into success, into graduation rates. So even if they think they love the school, if they are struggling to keep their head above water every single semester, that is going to be a huge weight on them, and the chances of them dropping out are really, really high. So factor that in there. The other thing I want to say here, just to stress this a little bit more and make you and your student a little bit more comfortable about being open to different schools, is that honestly with undergraduate, the name on the paper is not that important. Of course, we want to make sure it's accredited, which we recently released a video on accreditation if you want to learn more about that. And we want to make sure that it, of course, is a legitimate school. However, with undergraduate, what your student does at the institution is way more important than the name on the paper. Okay, so that said, being flexible and open to different schools can really change that financial aid package. So this is why we want to make sure that we are being open. The last thing here is that another option here is maybe they want that final paper to be from a big state university, University of South Carolina. They could consider something called a bridge program. This is where your student will do the first 2 years typically at a local community college, but it's an official agreement between the technical school or the community college and the big 4-year university where all the credits will transfer. We don't want to do this if we don't know the credits will transfer. We don't want your student to do all that time and all that money for no reason. But there are official bridge programs where they have the agreement. Your student can do the first 2 years at a community college and then finish with a degree at the same institution as everyone else. Of course, there are some other sacrifices with this, but I love this option. In fact, I have many students that decide to do this. They save tens of thousands of dollars and still end up at that 4-year university. Okay, so that was just one way to pay for college if your student does not get any financial aid. Number 2 is actually considering payment plans. Now, this is a great option to reduce the amount that's due at once. So it can give you and your student more time to come up with the money, and you can break it down into different options with payment plans. One thing to look into is that there is typically a payment plan fee, so you want to make sure that you're aware of that and that you can cover it. But it typically is going to be way less than any kind of interest that a student would pay. In fact, this is a great option for those families that are kind of on the verge of not needing loans, but they still have a good chunk of the bill, but they think they could cash flow it. Payment plans could be a great option. Now, the third suggestion is changing the number of credit hours we're taking. Now, this is in 2 different directions. First, we might want to take less credit hours, be part-time, and pay a fraction of the cost. Or we may want to take more credit hours. Earlier, I spoke about some institutions require a certain number of credit hours. Maybe they require a student to be full-time in order to be eligible for a lot of the financial aid. If that's the case, then we want to take more credit hours so that we get into that full-time requirement. So part-time is typically less than 12 hours. So that is 12 credit hours is typically 4 classes. So if there's a way to get your student to at least 4 classes per semester so that they can be considered full-time, then that might be the best situation here so they can receive that funding if this is the reason they didn't get it. Now, one thing that I want to stress here is that when a student's paying full-time tuition, they are paying that whether they're taking 4, 5, or typically 6 classes. I'm not saying have your student take 6 classes, but by doing only 4, they're kind of paying for a class that they're not taking. So if you can, have your student take on 5 classes minimum per semester to avoid prolonging that degree and really getting in and out on a timely basis when it comes to the institution, because getting more money, it runs out eventually. So if your student is taking 6, 7 years, 8 years to graduate, that financial aid will run out. So it's not worth adding 1 class, using up all the aid, but yet not maximizing the tuition. So again, maybe going part-time is the solution, but maybe going full-time is actually what would make them eligible for financial aid. So you have to see your situation here. Now, the fourth option here is a part-time job. So federal work study, this might be an option. I had a university job that was not federal work study, but it was a summer-based job, paid great money. I made a lot of money over that summer by working a lot of hours. It was intense, but I was able to use that money to pay for bills throughout the next school year. So perhaps a summer job and a part-time job is an option here. In fact, actually, it's been proven that students that work 20 hours or less as a college student simply do better because it forces them to have good time management skills and so on and so forth. I could go into it. Actually, we have a whole video on that as well. But a part-time job is a great option regardless of the financial aid situation. The fifth one is to appeal. So this is where earlier I mentioned maybe the numbers are not accurate, or maybe your financial situation has greatly changed since the numbers that were used and submitted on FAFSA. If that's the case, then appealing could be a great option. We will link to an appeals video that I have in the description below. Now, I have 2 more opportunities for families that did not receive financial aid for college. The 6th idea here is applying for scholarships. If your student is not applying for scholarships, they are missing out on possibly tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So applying for scholarships is one of my most favorite strategies. In fact, that's how I paid for college. I received 6 figures and graduated debt-free. And if you want to learn more about this, I have a full free training that we're linking to below, or you can go to thescholarshipsystem.com/free training, and you can learn exactly where your student can find these legitimate scholarships that can help them pay for college, regardless of their FAFSA situation. Now, the last way to pay for college if they didn't receive any financial aid, it's my least favorite, but it is ultimately an option, and that is private student loans. Again, one more video for you. Make sure you check out the description because clearly we have tons of resources on this, but we have a video explaining everything that your student and you need to know about private student loans, including who our favorite lenders are and where to focus on that because we want to make sure they're legitimate lenders. But that said, when it comes to private student loans, it's important to be cautious here and have your student calculate what is the monthly payment that they're going to be paying when they graduate and compare it to the career path they're taking. Are they going to be able to cover this? If not, again, go back to idea number 1 and think, can we find a more affordable institution? So be careful with these private loans. The other thing with private loans is that they typically require a cosigner because most students do not have any kind of credit history. That cosigner, typically the parents. And if you cosign on student loans, you are just as responsible for them as your student is. So just keep that in mind that if they aren't making the payments, you need to, or else your credit will be affected as well. So this is something very important to understand when it comes to private student loans, and just, a word of caution when it comes to taking these out. That's why we do what we do at the Scholarship System and Debt-Free Degree Lab, to help students and families avoid getting in that mess, but sometimes it is just necessary. And in that case, you want to make sure that you're making educated decisions. So again, make sure you check out that free video that we're linking to in the description below. Okay, so that said, there were 7+ ideas when it comes to paying for college without financial aid. Some of them are about ways to actually get financial aid if you didn't initially, but it's important to understand that there are a lot of different strategies when it comes to paying for college. That's why we have this channel. That's why every week we're releasing a new strategy. So make sure that you pursue the 7 suggestions that I just did, but also make sure you click subscribe because maybe we have a new strategy you didn't even think of coming out in the coming weeks. All right, again, this is Jocelyn from the Scholarship System, and I hope to see you in the next video.